I just found out I could do this. So I'm going to be going over today's work. So it's going to be an extension on yesterday's work when using the M to discuss the right-hand column, as well as the difference of the out and the in from the M. This sounds like a lot of work, but it's what you guys did yesterday. You did really well. I'm just adding 2 additional questions because I think that actually just help us frame our thinking a little bit. So let's get into it. Identifying patterns and making rules for the linear function with 2 operations, and those operations are going to be multiplication, that's one, and then addition or subtraction, that will be the second one. The operations are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. At this time, we're not using division. You could see it on the regions. Multiplication is a little more common, and it's just been a disaster writing division in the computer. Function equation is an equation where every input has one output. Linear equation is an equation which creates a line due to a constant rate of change, which is another way to say the M stays the same, which is why we can look at the M for the entire right-hand column or the output column. F of x equals mx plus b is our linear equation. Steps to determining a rule from a linear function is to examine the input to the output, asking how did the input turn into the output. So remember, the input is the given, it is the independent variable, and we create the output from that using our function machine. So yesterday we started doing these things, which are highlighted in your notes, so let's read it together. Looking at the out column, how is it changing? And that would be the M, whatever it's multiplied by. So we're going to look down the column and figure out what is it changing by. Then we're going to figure out, once we figure out what it's multiplied by, what is the difference? So if I multiplied the in to the M, it's not going to equal the out. It's going to be a little off. So that's where we're going to find what we plus or minus. Once we have that idea, we have to test each pair, and then we are writing it in the form of f of x equals mx plus b, which you guys already got. So looking at our first one, as you can see, I did change it a little bit. We have 2 additional questions, but let's get into it. So we said that we were going to look at the output, and we're going to figure out what is it changing by. So I go from -5 to -3 to -1 to 1. So immediately I realize I'm going up by 2. So 2. I'm going to insert my fancy multiplication sign again because I cannot stand the x, guys. It looks crazy. Okay. So we have 0 times 2. And then we realize 0 times 2 equals 0. So I mentioned this yesterday too, and the day before that. Zeros give us a lot of information because anything times 0 is going to be equal to 0. So it automatically gave us, without thinking very hard, what the b was going to be. What are we plus or minusing? So 0 times 2 equals 0. And then we got a -5. So the only way we could do that is we subtract 5. And that means we already found our rule. Not too bad, right? So we're going to take this times 2. We're going to test it for each one. I'm just copying and pasting for you guys because it's a little faster and you don't want to be listening to me the whole night. So 1 times 2 equals 2. And then we subtract 5 and we make sure it works, and it does in fact equal -3. So that means we're on a really good target. Then we have 2 times 2, which equals 4. We subtract 5, and that equals -1. Now let's make sure our last one works. So we have 3 times 2, and that equals 6. And then we subtract 5, and what will you know? It equals 1. So that means we found the rule. Now let's go through those additional questions. What is the output f of x column changing by? So that was our first step. We looked at this, and we realized it was changing by 2. And I'm just going to write 2. And it was going up by 2, so I'm going to leave it as a positive. What did we have to add or subtract to get to the in column? Well, looking at my work, I had to subtract 5. So I'm just going to write subtract 5, nothing major. So those 2 things give us the rule. So looking at f of x equals mx plus b, let me just draw it out a little bit more. So it's the f of x equals sum m times x plus or minus sum b. So that's just my little note hand for you guys. So we have f of x equals, what was my m? Well, that was 2, x. And then we subtracted 5, and that's it. Nice work. Now let's get into the second one. A little more challenging. Please note I wrote more in scroll, so please scroll down with me. Question 2. A little more challenging because I did, in fact, give you negatives. I just think negatives are really important for us to practice, guys. So I said first step is to look at the output column. So looking at the output column, what is the first thing you notice? How is it changing? I went from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2. That's right, you went down by 1. So I'm going to set up you don't have to do this. I'm just quickly putting in my multiplication. I know I'm multiplying. So what did I multiply by? If I'm going down by 1, I multiplied by -1. But now we have to figure it out what we added by. Well, good thing we have a 0. So I'm going to work with my 0 first. So we times by -1, which everything turns into a 0. And then we got 3, which means 0 plus 3 must have equaled 3. Again, those zeros are so good at giving us information. Now let's try for the other ones. And I could have figured it out as well. So -2 times -1 equals +2. Oops, I wrote a 3. What would I have had to add or subtract to get to +5? Well, I would have to add 3. See how it works? So the 0 gave us the exact same information that we could have figured out over here. It just helps us a little bit faster. So now let's set up our other ones. So I'm going to times -1 times -1, which equals +1. Then I'm going to add 3, and what does that equal? 4. That also checks out. And I'm going to multiply these. Let me grab my little multiplication. -1 times -1, excuse me, which would equal -1. And then we add 3 to that, it would in fact equal 2. So it all worked out. We did it. So looking at my output, what is the output column changing by? So it went down by 1. So going down, that means we would represent with a negative. And what did we add or subtract to get to the in? Well, to get to the in, we had to add by 3. What is my rule? So thinking of in terms of, oopsies, f of x equals -1x plus 3. And remembering we can always simplify this to -x plus 3. And that's it. You guys got this, and I will look forward to grading it later today.